You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello and welcome to the 42 Cast, your ultimate answer to fandom, geekiness, and everything. As always, I am your host, Nathan, and we have another great episode lined up for you. And this time, we're going to do something a little bit different because we're going to talk about a specific topic in genre fiction. And by that, I mean that we're going to talk about the multiverse, which seems to be a concept that's just blowing up in just about everything nowadays. But before we do that, let's meet our cast for this week. So starting off, he's our resident Don Knotts impersonator, and that is Steven. How are you doing, Steven?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
No problem. I thought you might have replied in your Don Knotts voice.
Oh, yeah, well, I could do that if you like.
Oh, that's great.
I'll do the whole podcast as Don Knotts. How about
that? Yeah, do a Don Knotts movie about the multiverse.
Yeah.
All the Don Knotts roles in a movie together. It's kind of like
right. Mr. Limpet meets Barney Fife.
Apple Dumpling Gang.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, we could do that.
This is great. Like,
Opie, why are you a fish?
When you learn somebody that you've known for a while, like, just has a skill you didn't know about before, and it's just like, oh man, this is awesome.
You know, we all have hobbies.
So I know there hasn't been a lot of time since you were on the show before, Stephen, but anything new and exciting going on for you?
Well, I seem to have woken up in the Fortress of Solitude because it's a frozen tundra outside. Thanks.
Yeah.
I
may be experiencing that myself since we don't live that far away from each other.
Yeah. And there's holidays coming up and things like that. So, getting ready for those sorts of things. Apart from that, just kind of chilling, getting ready for shows.
Yeah, you're
ready
chilling.
for her shows. Yeah.
We're all chilling right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good for you to, it's good to have you back on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right, next up, she is our resident MCU expert, and that is Allie. How are you doing, Allie?
I'm doing okay.
That's
I am
good.
less chilling than everyone else.
And what did you say the temperature was in Florida, where you are?
Right here now it's 63.
Oh,
Which is not cold to you guys.
No.
It's shorts weather.
Yeah, like most people here probably keep their homes about that temperature. People come in and be like, you're so hot. I keep my home at 70. That's my concession to the winter. I actually want it warmer. But I don't want to waste the electricity on getting it hotter. So, yeah. But yeah, what's been going on for you since the last time you were on the show?
I am currently getting ready to relaunch my Patreon after having it closed for most of 2022 while I was dealing with some family health stuff. So I am kind of I took the time while I was off for family reasons to reassess what I was doing and what was working best and what wasn't working as well. And so I'm excited to be able to relaunch some stuff. I'm going to offer a tier that has monthly prompts for writers, although if you do other creatives, you might be inspired by it as well. And I'll be responding to those prompts too. So I'll get to share some more of my writing as part of it. So I'm excited about that. And that's the main thing that I'm doing right now is just like making sure that everything's right as I send out that information and scheduling, tweets and everything.
Oh yeah, Twitter still does exist.
It does still exist. It's still there. It has not imploded.
What day of the week is it?
Right. You'll be able to, it'll be like counting the rings on the tree. You can tell like when a 42 cast episode happens based on our references to Twitter. But yeah, no, that's really cool. I'm happy for you and hope that things go really well with your Patreon.
Me too.
All right, let's get to have you back on the show, Allie.
Happy to be here.
All right, and finally, he is an actor and teacher and someone I met through the American Sci-Fi and Fantasy Media Group at Dragon Con, and that is Tom. How are you doing, Tom?
Pretty good. I do act from time to time, very rarely, but I'm more of a writer.
Okay. Oh, okay. See, I'm learning something new all the time. I knew you had an IMDb profile before I met you.
I do, but I'm trying to think if I have. Some of my professional writing credits aren't up there. Thank you, Family Channel. But I got paid. That's the important thing. I probably do have more acting and producing credits than writing.
Okay. No, I will note that for the future. But so what's been going on for you, Tom?
Well, just to satisfy any curiosity, it's 73 in West Palm Beach. I'm surprised there's a 10-degree difference between Orlando and West Palm, considering it's only about 2.5 hours, 180 some miles.
Yeah.
I turned in my grades Sunday. So I taught 17 credits, 8 classes across 3 departments and 156 students, and I never plan to do that again.
Oh my God.
That sounds like a lot.
It was nuts. And I'm a SAP, so I gave students extra time to finish assignments. I should just say no. That's why they call it a deadline.
Right.
First word, dead. I did, however, turn my Writers Guild nomination ballot for TV shows yesterday. The deadline is next Monday. I figured there was a year I actually forgot to do it, so I just got to vote on the finalists. But this year I did it early because there was a lot of good TV this year. Can't say the same about films. A lot of not great films.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's some, though.
Yeah, but they're going to be scrounging to get... If they do 10 Best Picture nominees again, and I have a feeling they won't, because I think last year is the first year they had 10, because they have this whole ranked choice voting system and crazy rules, so it can be anywhere between 5 and 10. But I think we're in line for another lackluster crop of Oscar Best Picture nominees.
Yeah, I did raise my eyebrows a little bit seeing that Marvel submitted Thor: Love and Thunder for a contender for Best Picture, and I was like, what?
Because why not?
I mean, yeah, I guess it's why not, but I mean, at the same time, I was like, well, you're going for the long shot.
It didn't even make my top 3 superhero movies for the year.
All right, but no, it's good to have you back on the show, Tom.
Thanks for having me.
But yeah, you know what time it is now. It's time for our 5-minute controversy. And for those of you just joining the show, this is something we do before we talk about our topic. It helps us loosen up a little bit and also gives you some insight into how we feel about something that's going through the geekosphere right now. And so today, or at least today is when I saw it, apparently the ruling was made on Tuesday, which is 2 days before we recorded this. A ruling was made in a case where a couple of people had sued Universal Studios because they had shown a trailer featuring Ana de Armas in a movie, but then they had cut her from the film by the time it actually was on screen. And so basically the ruling says that movie studios are not able to mislead the public with their trailers and therefore cannot put anything in the trailers that isn't actually in the movie. Now, this is kind of interesting because it has some implications, because sometimes, this is deliberate. Sometimes it's because of something where just a change happens in editing between when the trailers come out and when the movie comes out. And the one that I just thought about, or a friend of mine sort of pointed out to me, and we talked about a little bit, was that sometimes some footage is filmed just for the trailers and is always intended to be just for the trailer. And so it's like, is that not allowed anymore? Because, again, it's really complicated, it seems, and how this is going to affect things. So I'm just kind of curious about everybody's just, bullet point thoughts on this. Do you think that this is a good thing, or do you think that this is going to be kind of a bad thing overall, and sort of the ramifications that it has for how trailers need to be made. So let's start with you on this one, Allie.
I understand fan frustrations when something is in the trailer that you would like to see in the context of the film. Suing over it is just silly. And I kind of think it's a bad idea, because part of the reason of the trailer, it's supposed to get you hyped. I did read, the judge's ruling was talking about how trailers are inherently commercial, and that's accurate. It is a commercial for the film. And so if you go too far away, you are not delivering on the promise. But at the same time, like, trailers are kind of an art form, and it's something that needs to be allowed to be what it is. And so, I mean, like, I kind of see both sides of this, but on the whole, I kind of think it's ridiculous. And I am perfectly fine with trailers being as misleading as they currently are, Marvel. And, and it's just fine. It's fine. I don't mind myself.
Okay. Tom, what do you think?
I was a paralegal in the Navy. So the core legal issue is that while movies are protected speech in the First Amendment, commercials are not protected speech. Advertising is not protected speech. And so if you were calling a trailer a commercial for a movie, which it really is, it's very frivolous. It's very frivolous. If I were, the real remedy should be give them back their money. Right. I mean, and the court costs are going to be outrageous, considering, how much did you pay for this? Okay, we'll give you back your $3 for your your video, your streaming rental of it. But yeah, what's interesting is the defense from the studios was, well, what are you going to do? Are people going to be able to sue if the movie's terrible? It's like, we wish we could, but you're covered because they are protected speech. And it's fascinating. I talk about this in my film appreciation course at my university. Movies were not always protected speech. Our wonderful SCOTUS has a habit of making a bad ruling or a good ruling and then reversing it for either the right reasons or for bad reasons. But that was a case from early 20th century. There was a test, I think it was Mutual versus Ohio, and it was about boxing films, and there were laws against boxing films, which some people suspected had more than a whiff of racism, because a lot of boxers tended to be not non-white, and the SCOTUS ruled that film was not protected speech. And then fast forward to the 50s, it was overturned in another ruling. So yeah, the problem is, and responding to Allie, America, land of the free, home of the litigious. Anybody can sue anybody can sue anybody else for anything. You can't always win, but you can sue. And these days, people sue for stupid stuff. So yeah, I just wish it reeks of the whole toxic fandom things, and that's a whole nother discussion, which has reared its ugly head because of DC Studios and blah blah blah. Certain people have selective amnesia about what happened when he was defended by toxic fans, but hey. So yeah, I'm like, don't we have better things to talk about? Better things to go to court for? Like all these great books that are being banned from school library because somebody has their bonnet in the twist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, DC does provide us with a disproportionate number of controversies, but we're not going there today. Stephen, what do you think about this?
I'm not a lawyer, but I've played one. And sidestepping the whole lawsuit thing for a second, because that's just a labyrinth, and I tend to agree with the frivolity of it. But I think I can, with regard to this particular case and the whole Ana de Armas being in a trailer, not being in the film, I think I can understand not wanting to allow studios to do sort of a bait and switch, if you will, of saying something's in a movie when it's not. And I can agree with that to an extent. However, and I think Allie brought up a good point with Marvel, and I think Star Trek has done this too, where they will show things in trailers in order to quell spoilers. And so, it's again, it's not in the film, but that's a different intent. That's not a bait and switch. That's actually serving the audience's expectations of the film. And so I think ultimately it's going to be a very difficult line to hoe to, you know what I mean? I think it's going to be a very difficult needle for legally to thread. I think I see the intent they're trying to go with. I just don't know how they're going to be. Is it going to be case by case? If if somebody doesn't like a trailer, they're going to sue. It just seems like a labyrinth, and I get where you're going. I just don't think it's. I don't see I don't see this ending well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you are kind of close to where I'm coming from on this one, Stephen, because it's like, yeah, as far as the legalities of it. I understand exactly what they're arguing and why they're arguing. My problem is that, you can't rule on intent, or, I mean, I think they try to sometimes, but because to me, this was an accident, right? This was not an intentional thing where they were trying to bait and switch people by saying, oh, look at this actress that's going to be in this movie. And, oh, we took her away, that wasn't why. They had totally intended to have her until, for whatever reason in editing, she was removed. It happens all the time. Anna Paquin was removed from X-Men Days of Future Past. You could get the director's cut that has her back in it, but the version shown in theaters did not have her. So, and so to me, it's because it was not malicious intent, in this specific case, it shouldn't even be a consideration, but they're trying to create an umbrella of all cases you cannot show something in a movie or in a trailer that is not in the movie. And I think that's where the real problem is, because, you mentioned Marvel, and I think that is the perfect example of when it's done deliberately, but not as a bait and switch, but because of the fact that they don't want people to piece together the movie through the scenes, which is what people try to do with Marvel trailers. And Kevin Feige, being very canny, has seen that and has said, oh, I'm going to put the Hulk running with everybody in Wakanda, so that people are trying to, it was so funny watching the lead up to Infinity War, and everybody was trying to put the clips into sequence, and we're trying to figure out what happens when and what location and everything. And it was and I laugh now that I know that they just put stuff in there that's totally not there. And I think that's a good thing.
Right.
But I don't know that there's any way to construct a legal framework around that to say that should be protected, because again, it's a commercial interest thing. And so that's one of the problems. It's the law, I think, is screwing us over of something that I think is actually good, but at the same time, I don't know how to protect it. So, that is what it is. So I'm very disappointed by this ruling, but I totally understand why it's happened.
Yeah.
My understanding was basically the judge wouldn't allow the suit to be dismissed, so it's going to move forward. That I think there will be more to come, which, again, don't you have more serious things to think about? What's interesting is...
I will laugh if this goes all the way to the Supreme Court.
I think that they would respectfully decline to... We don't care. What's interesting, though, is the first teaser trailer for Spider-Man 1 had him swinging between the World Trade Center towers. And like a dummy, I didn't download it, and I thought, oh, I'll just grab that later. 9/11 happened, they pulled that thing down. So you could make a case saying, hey, if once you know that this situation is not in the final movie, pull the trailers showing it. That could be a way to cover themselves. But I can't, it's so weird and frivolous. There's a lot of stuff in Hollywood.
Well, and beyond.
I'm still stunned that people saw that movie thinking Ana de Armas was in it, and they're going to be disappointed if she wasn't. Is there a reason to see that movie? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, all right, but at least we've come to the end of the 5-minute controversy, so, And this one we did keep kind of down. I think it is a little
Yep.
over 5 minutes, but not like how they sometimes get. So, all right, but yeah. So we are going to talk about the multiverse in a minute, but first we're going to pause for a promo from another fine podcast.
Hey, we're Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
Almost 12 years old. Davy Jones was it for me.
I was having problems dancing and tamborining. I got overzealous and overly excited.
Like, we've had our own little version of Monkey Mania 50 years later, which is just crazy.
Be sure to like and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and monkeyingaround.com.
What if you found a portal to a parallel universe? What if you could slide into 1,000 different worlds where it's the same year and you're the same person, but everything else is different? And what if you can't find your way home?
And we're back. And like we mentioned at the top of the show, we are talking about the multiverse, which has been a concept floating around in sci-fi for decades. But it's something that at least I didn't encounter outside of prose very much until recent years, where it seems like now a lot of movies and TV shows are taking up the idea of the multiverse and incorporating it into their storylines. Very famously, Everything Everywhere All at Once was a movie that came out recently. Recently within, a year, that had, that utilized that concept at the core of the film. Marvel has been going very strongly into the multiverse lately. DC in its adaptation properties, I should say, both Marvel and DC and comics have had the multiverse since the 60s. But DC's TV shows have also been utilizing the multiverse quite a bit, and so it's getting out there into pop culture. There are a lot of examples of it. And so first I want to go around and talk to everybody just about, why is the multiverse a concept that fascinates you? Like, what draws you to the multiverse idea? So let's start with you on that one, Tom.
It's a fascinating concept because I have a sci-fi playlist that I walk my dog with, and great genre show, Sliders. What if there was another Earth with a version of you and everything was the same except for one small detail? And so they got like 4 or 5 seasons out of that concept, and it's started strong and then outlived its welcome far too long. But the whole, when DC kind of introduced the concept in comics, it was a way to explain why that there were Silver Age versions of Golden Age characters with the same name and similar powers, but different costumes, completely different origins. And it was an elegant solution. Of course, it got way out of hand. So for their 50th anniversary, they decided, hey, we're going to destroy our multiverse and then introduce a new universe. And of course, that lasted for not long, and they decided, oh, well, we don't have infinite Earths, we just have 52 Earths. It's like, you guys are Nimrods. And even when they were
DC's never been good at long-term thinking. It's not a new thing.
Oh my gosh, it just gets nuts. And so I think that, face it, sometimes it's used really well. The first, the animated Spider-Man film, Into the Multiverse, saw the trailer again for Across the Multiverse, which is part 2 of the trilogy. Sometimes it's used really clumsily. I would argue Doctor Strange 2 did not handle it well. And Crisis was the Arrowverse version of Crisis was not good.
All right, we're going to talk about specific instances later, but right now let's keep it on just the concept and like what really fascinates.
So I think, I really loved Everything Everywhere All at Once because it kind of used it as like a really cool indie film idea. And I've I've loved Michelle Yeoh since Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I hope Ki Hai Kwan wins Best Supporting, because that is the picture of him with Harrison Ford reuniting at D23 is like the best, most heartwarming Hollywood story of the year. And so I think too many times it's starting to get a little overused and becoming kind of trite and like a poor excuse to explain away inconsistencies or bad continuity. So, it's just on another planet or another version of it's like, get over yourself. But the whole idea, there's a really cool film I just saw recently with Jake Gyllenhaal and directed by it's Denis Villeneuve, who's awesome. But it's basically about a guy who discovers he has a doppelganger. And he's a college professor, discovers he has a doppelganger who's an actor, and then they start messing with each other's lives. And it takes some really interesting, dark twists. I'll look up the name of it. It escapes me for the moment. But that whole idea of doppelganger, ghostly double, it's a great one for science fiction fantasy. Charles Williams, who was a contemporary of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, wrote a book called Descent into Hell, and that was one of the main plot devices in it, that people had doppelgangers. And then I was talking to one of my former students, and she thought doppelganger was just a Facebook social media term. It's like, no, it's a real German word. Read a book.
Oh my God.
Pick up a dictionary.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll stop.
All right, Stephen, what do you like about the multiverse?
Well, from an audience standpoint, I think part of the appeal of a multiverse is, we're all beings. We all make decisions all day in our lives. We have these patterns that we follow, go to work, whatever, these patterns of behavior that we're into, the certain routines, and the idea of a multiverse that we can, there might be a possibility to break the boundaries and constrictions of those decisions and those patterns in a way without totally losing ourselves where we are now. I think from an audience standpoint, there's some appeal to that. It's sort of whole what if something were different, how different would everything else be? And to be able to, take those sort of mind experiments along those pathways. I think there's appeal there. For writers, I think it's appealing because you can if you've written yourself into a corner, it's an easy way to write yourself out. In certain instances, but there's also there can be some interesting character exploration by changing little aspects of characters and seeing where they go without making the changes permanent. So there's some appeal for both actors and writers, I think, to explore multiverse stories. And I think that might be some of the appeal of why we see so much of this.
Okay. And Allie?
I agree entirely with Stephen. I think it's just so much based on the ability to explore, and you can not only explore different characterizations of the same character, but also different outcomes of events or settings. What is this character? Not just like what is this character like in this different setting, but what does this choice do to the world? So I think that's one of the things that's very appealing, especially as a writer or as a fan, getting to experience that. That's why one of my favorite Marvel properties is What If, because I like taking those looks into the multiverse to see, well, what if this would happen differently? So I really enjoy all of that kind of stuff. But for me, the multiverse also ties in with time travel. And I am a sucker for time travel. So the whole, different decisions cause different branches. And that's how you get the multiverse is, tied up with time travel for me. So there's several different sci-fi elements that we talk about, like doppelgangers and things like that, that all sort of tie in together at least in my mind. And so all of them are about an exploration of who the character is, at their core, because whenever you have those different choices, yeah, little things might be different, but maybe the main thing isn't. They're still going to be driven in a specific way. Like when you have the characters flip and they're suddenly villains, there's usually still something in the character that is recognizable as that character. It's just been corrupted or molded in a different way to make them villainous rather than heroic. And some of that exploration is just really interesting as a human being getting to watch.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place. As someone who lives in a constant state of replaying the events in my life and thinking about what would happen if things went differently or whatnot, it's kind of this is a concept that feeds into that sort of thing, and sort of liking the idea of what can happen based on just the smallest changes in what did actually happen, and how would that spiral out. Like Ali mentioned, you can get into this with time travel also. I do want us to focus a little more on other versions of the multiverse. Not to say we can't mention time travel versions, just because I plan on doing a time travel episode also. So we can talk about that there more so. But yeah, that is one of the things that I wanted to talk about also, though, was that there are different versions of the multiverse and what people mean by that. But yeah, specifically talking about What If, which Ali brought up. One of the things I like about that is because, and one of the reasons why I like how Marvel does What If as opposed to how DC does Elseworlds, is that Elseworlds is you change so many things all at once. What Marvel always did with What If is we change one thing, because that's almost like an experiment, right? You control everything else and you just have one variable. And so you can really get into character with that, because the outcome of this event changed. How do the characters respond to that change? And I prefer that in a lot of ways to the sort of what if Batman actually existed in pirate times? Well, okay, I mean, that's fun, but it's not really. You have to change so many things to make that happen that it's kind of
I am going to read that too.
Right. But yeah, so talking about the multiverse, Ali brought up time travel and the idea of you go back in time, you change something, you go back to the present, you have a different version of things. There's a sort of intersection of those concepts where it says the way to fix because there's the whole grandfather paradox problem, where some versions of time travel say when you go back in time and change something, you actually create a different reality. So your past is fine because it's on this other reality where everything still happened the same way that you remember. But now you're living in this other reality that you've generated by changing events, which is sort of the link between time travel and the multiverse.
Sort of the Star Trek way.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Star Trek has utilized that. Marvel, a lot of times, although it's been inconsistent and it's over its many decades of publishing, a lot of times Marvel uses that version of time travel. Where the idea is, we went back in time, we changed this, the senator doesn't die, but that reality still exists somewhere and it can still intersect with ours. One that I just recently saw, a documentary that was talking about multiverse theory and everything, talked about that I had never considered before, is the idea that since the universe is infinite, that there could be other parts of the universe that are exactly like our galaxy with an Earth and everything else, that's just slightly different because how things formed or whatever. But it's I never considered it would just be a spatial thing before. I always thought about it being either time travel like Ali was talking about, or the idea that every decision you make always just generates new realities that sprout off. But that was an interesting version. And that's the other version that I was going to mention, the idea of on the quantum level, every time there's a decision made, both decisions, or depending on how many outcomes there are, all outcomes happen and there's a universe for each of them.
Sliding doors.
Is anyone aware of any other versions of the multiverse?
I was going to say Stargate handles it very interesting. They handle 3 different versions. They handle time travel, alternate universes, and parallel dimensions, and they refer to them all very separately. So time travel, they do both closed loops and you can change the past.
Yeah,
It's
don't get
very
me started
confusing.
on that. It gets me very
Yeah,
angry.
like we're not going to go down that one. It's very inconsistent. That's all that I'm going to say about it.
Yes.
Then they have this mirror that can go to an alternate reality, and so they've got several episodes where they visit an alternate reality where someone didn't make the choice that they made that wound them up at Stargate Command, kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And then they also have parallel dimensions where there's other creatures that exist in our world, but we just can't see them. We're not on the same level as them. And
Right.
so it's one of those things that, like, the more you think about the different levels, the more confusing it gets, because just how complicated everything gets. So it's one of those things about vocabulary is super important. And so even though Stargate is not necessarily consistent with their time travel, they are consistent with their vocabulary.
Right.
And they don't ever refer to a alternate universe as a parallel universe or something like that. They're really specific with it. And so that was just the thing that I was just like, oh yeah, that's a really specific thing that you have to get into when talking about multiversal stuff, is what the terminology is. Yeah, theirs is just travel with that mirror.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people are very inconsistent with alternate dimensions and parallel universes.
Yeah.
So I want to be very specific that I'm talking about parallel universes here when I talk about this. I'm not talking about other dimensions of existence that have different physical laws than the ones we have. I'm talking about it's a universe with the same physical laws as ours, but the events within that universe are different.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the multiverse.
Yeah, and when I, as a kid, when I read What If, I never really even considered it as sort of a multiverse thing. I just thought of it as a writing exercise by the writers, and it was a lot of fun. And I was just having fun with it. And I think one of the earliest things I remember reading that explicitly mentioned a multiverse was Larry Niven's short story All the Myriad Ways, which is, for the characters, every decision they make, another universe pops open where every possible decision is made. And so it's just continually splintering as people are making decisions. And that concept just kind of, it did kind of grab me in a bit, because it, and it also appealed to a bit of, like, not just the, being locked in by your decisions or being bound by your decisions, but also the thought of that events that become very profound in your life, things like big life events, marriage, birth, death, divorce, those sorts of things that seem very permanent to us in a multiverse setting maybe aren't so much. And there are still possibilities from those. And I think I found that very appealing.
Yeah, the earliest example I'm familiar with is a writer named H. Beam Piper. He wrote short stories that are all part of what he called Paratime. And he also wrote a novel called Lord Calvin of Otherwyn, which is actually the first thing I read. I went back and read the short stories after I read the novel. But he was writing in the late 50s, early 60s. And his version is a little bit different. I mean, it's still the idea of these realities are created by people making different decisions. But the reason why is weird. It's the idea, again, remember, this is the 60s. The idea is that while you sleep, your consciousness is in the astral plane. And in the astral plane, there are no different realities. So all your different versions of yourself sort of like intermingle. And also time doesn't exist in the astral plane. So what happens is you get sort of filtered through like notions of the outcome, like bad outcomes that your alternate selves experienced in their timelines. And so when you go to a particular location and you get a bad feeling about going right and you decide to go left, that's because you're remembering the bad subconsciously remembering the bad outcome your alternate self who went, right did. So you're going to go left. And it was sort of, weird, sort of, hippie, transcendental, sort of way of creating a reason why all these different choices are happening and why there's these different realities. And if you think about it too hard, it kind of breaks down. But it's still like kind of an interesting thing just because it was a different way of explaining it than I'd ever, seen before. But yeah, I mean, his stories were good. I just found that reasoning behind why the multiverse exists to be a little. Okay.
Well, using that kind of reasoning, Robert Frost is one of the first people, because two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. The Back to the Future one's ending always bothered me, because I grew up reading Silver Age DC comic books, and according to their rules pre-crisis, you cannot change the past. And so when Marty changes the past and gets back to a new future, that I'm like, no. But Starlog published a really cool essay called The Other Marty McFly, picking it apart. Car D'Angelo, who's one of the junior editors back then, was the one who championed that article. And what's funny is that was the basis for Back to the Future 2, is Biff steals the time machine and creates his own reality. And then, because everybody's head hurt by the end of that movie, it's like, let's go back to the West and have a good old fashioned time. Yeah. But Gwyneth Paltrow's movie Sliding Doors is one where she's got two different realities, which I kind of like the more self-contained ones. Those tend to be more provocative and quote unquote realistic. But some of the and Star Trek's rules have always been interesting, because you have the Guardian of Forever, who allow, McCoy changes something and then changes their future so that the ship's not there. Yeah, one of the time travel things. And then fast forward to now, we've got the parallel universes. We've got Q allowing people, or specifically Picard, to relive that decision he made as a young officer and completely changing the trajectory of his life. And it's his gift to Jean-Luc. And then, of course, they brought back the Guardian in Discovery. So, but they used the Guardian and used the mirror universe at the same time. It's like, let's compile all of our great, So I think one of the problems is it often becomes whatever the writers want it to be for whatever point in time for the story they want to tell. And one of the cool things about both versions of Quantum Leap, since it's really the new series is a continuation, is the fact that in the original series they introduced the evil leapers near the end, and in the new one, we're not sure what's going on, but there's an episode where somebody runs into Ben and says, "Stop following me," and we're like, "What?" And it's a nice little tease. And now that they have a second season pickup, we know that they're probably going to explore that mythology more. But I think people are fascinated because, what if I had not married that person? What if I had taken that job? I mean, there's infinite possibilities. I agree with you about the Elseworlds versus the What Ifs, though, especially the first volume of What Ifs almost always had a downer ending. Not always, but I wish the television series hadn't quite followed that same trajectory, because for me, the ones that were more light and fun, because hey, we could what if, and it's going to end badly.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like putting your characters under extreme circumstances. I mean, that to me, it's like, what if lets you do the things you can't do in the major, because it's like you're not going to kill off characters and do except very rarely, do you do that? And so it's like, what if lets you sort of like have take the training wheels off and say like, let's make this story go in whatever direction we want it to, and put these characters under extreme circumstances and see how they respond to that. So I'm fine with more often than not for them to be downbeat endings, because I feel like that lets them do that test, putting them under extreme circumstances and whatnot, knowing it's safe because the core characters still exist, and they're mostly happy lives.
Yes, but I'm not going to rewatch them over and over and over and over.
Seriously.
Oh man, I reread What If so many times. Like, I had so many of those issues. That was one of the main ones I would go to back issue bins for, and it was always great because they weren't the high priced ones. They were always like in the 50-cent and dollar bins, where it was just like, oh, take this issue, and you didn't have to get a run because they were all standalone, or mostly.
Yeah.
So it was a great one to collect. But yeah, so let's talk about sort of our favorite. Pick one example of the multiverse. Again, like I say, I would prefer to stay away from time travel examples, because we're going to have a separate time travel episode, but pick one that we can then all talk about if we've read or watched it. ourselves. So let's start with you on this one, Stephen.
Oh my. One that I really liked. I may have a disagreement with Tom on one. Because I kind of, and I'm not a huge Arrowverse fan. For a lot of, I like it okay. My thing with Arrowverse is that their heart's in the right place. They have an enormous respect for the source material. I felt like the scripts always felt rushed, and they could probably use a little more polish. That said, I kind of liked what they did with Crisis. I didn't like all the nuances of all the script, but I liked the idea of it, because to me it was the idea that everything exists, everything is canon, and it's all just out there someplace, and you can kind of choose if you have a good story idea for why something should intersect, then do it. Otherwise it doesn't, and it lives on its own. And to me, that's almost kind of essential if you're going to really tell a multiverse story, because it's so easy to get lost in all of the weeds and the minutia and all the different pathways that something can take, and you need something to focus on. So if you have something, a reason to focus on this other universe out here somewhere, have it connect for as long as you need it to connect, and then let them both go on their own path. That seems to work pretty well. And that's one thing that that Crisis event did, was it had the intersections for just as long as it needed them, didn't really belabor the point, and then dropped them, mostly horribly, but still dropped them. I mean, they killed off a lot of universes, but still, but they killed off universes that they weren't going to need anymore. You know, nobody's really going to go back to Adam West's Batman universe anymore. So you could probably get rid of that, even though it was a little sad, but it was also a little funny. That worked for me more than didn't, mostly because of that. It seemed like a story reason that they were going in and doing things, and reasons why they were connecting. A little bit of fan service, and that was kind of fun. But it seemed to have a reason for being, more than just an excuse to kind of get out of jail free, or reverse something that we shouldn't have done in the first place.
As someone who's been following the Arrowverse since basically I came in the year after it started, but I caught up with the first season of Arrow. So to me, Crisis, the problem was it was a decision to do it based solely on the fact that they had two properties that had started at other networks, and so therefore had been in other universes, but now we're all on the CW, because Supergirl's first season was on CBS, but then with the second season it was on the CW. And Black Lightning, even though it started on the CW, had been developed at Fox. So when they brought it into the CW, they also had it on a separate universe, because they went with the scripts they had already developed. And so they were like, oh, we got to merge those in with these other characters that were interconnected, Arrow and Flash and Legends of Tomorrow. We want them all to live in the same universe together. So to me, it was a very commercial decision, to do this.
That's the part that didn't work as well for me, because but the parts that did work was when they brought in Michael Keaton's Batman universe, and they brought in
there was definitely some fun fan service,
the Birds of Prey stuff, but it was just there for a while. They needed it and then dropped it.
John Wesley ship.
The John Wesley ship Flash was so much fun to watch.
It was Kevin Conroy's Batman was the one that did it for me.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And the fact that they stuck the landing 2 that is where that character would have wound up, as the bitter, hateful, guy that's sitting. I was like, yes, even though he's beloved, that is where that guy would have ended up. So
that was the stuff they got right. And it was very fun to watch them do that well. Because I think they've done a lot of, like I say, I think a lot of the Arrowverse stuff seemed rushed. So it felt like they had an idea of where they wanted to take those characters, even for a moment, and they had the courage to do it, and they did it fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, but the other thing that I wanted to say about Crisis was that, but then I felt like they didn't stick the landing, because after going through this whole rigmarole of saying we've merged everything back together, in the last like 2 minutes of it, they're like, oh, but actually there's all these other universes too. And I'm like, wait a minute, the whole point was to merge everything into one. And then you said like, oh no, those all exist too. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Which I kind of get, because then, they do have these other shows that are still ongoing, at least at that time. So you can't really like merge those in. I get that. Plus, to say, oh, we're going to merge it all into one, except we're not going to leave these other ones. That's still so very DC, isn't it?
Well, it is very DC. But I'm just saying, like, they didn't need to acknowledge the existence of like the HBO Max shows or the movies, because to me it was like, you're just saying everything that the Arrowverse intersects with merged into one, and you could have just left it at that and not like. But anyway, I thought like they didn't stick the landing.
That they had fun with it. If that was what they were going to do, at least they had some fun with it.
Yeah,
and I do like the idea that, for me, the DC films, where I always hoped they would take them, and maybe James Gunn will figure out and get something going with with this new direction. But I always thought that like the DC did multiverse stuff probably better than Marvel. And in the film universe, that seemed like it would lend itself better than, say, a Marvel cinematic universe would. That you could have a standalone Joker film and several Batman films, and they're all and it doesn't really matter, because they're all just separate universes. And if you have an idea that it should merge, well, then write that up and let's see if that's a movie. But then have it happen for that time and then let it go. That seems like it's very much in DC's wheelhouse.
Yeah, everything that's been said so far is that Joker and the Batman will remain as separate universes from the movies that James Gunn is working on. And James Gunn said even with the stuff he's doing, he's planning on doing some Elseworlds type movies also within that framework.
Yeah.
So
and we'll see where he goes with it. But but it seems like that's DC properties lend themselves well to that. And I'd like to see them embrace that, but do it well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And not worry about having to connect everything. Whereas Marvel connects everything, and they do it very well, but let them do that.
I have been a strong advocate of the idea of Marvel doing just that, of now that you're going into the multiverse, to just allow yourself to do properties that are like, this is a particular director's take on this character, and it doesn't have to merge in with everything else. I mean, you can just sort of hand wave it and say it's part of the multiverse, and it never has to merge in with any of the other movies or shows or whatever that you're doing with. And
not
this
in
is
616.
just right. Exactly. And as long as you label it, that's perfectly fine in my mind. And to say we do have a core,
as long as you're upfront with it,
most of our stuff does happen in the same universe. But then, we'll have these properties, these either Disney Plus shows or movies that are their own standalone thing, because there's certain paths that are closed to them because of the way they've made decisions within the core story that they're telling. That would be interesting to go back and do something like, one of the ones that I brought up before is, what if you wanted to do The Invaders? Which I know I'm the only one asking for The Invaders as a movie.
No,
you are not. I'm also asking for it.
But because of the way they did World War II in the Marvel universe, that's not going to be that way. But they could do something where it's an Invaders series of movies. It's just like, this is a different version of Captain America and Namor than the ones that you saw. And, and here's these other cool characters that, we are throwing in also. And so, that's
the original Human Torch.
Right. The original Human Torch, Union Jack, the Wizard, Miss America, there's all sorts of characters you can throw in there. So, even the Golden Age Vision. That's the sort of thing that I hope that Marvel eventually gets to, because I agree. I think even though it's cool that Marvel has kept everything all connected, and sometimes I'm like, I would just like a standalone movie at some point where we don't have to have at least one guest star from another movie in the movie, just so we can focus on a character.
Right.
So,
that would be Moon Knight, Nathan.
Well, true. I mean, true. Some of the Disney Plus stuff hasn't had a guest star, but like the movies now are at a point where it's like every movie has at least one guest star.
It's the most laborious part of when Julia Louis-Dreyfus appears on screen in Black Panther, I wanted to go on Black Twitter and said, brothers and sisters, go to the bathroom when you see her face. Because
Like, and the thing is, Black Panther is one of the few times that I've been like, guys, most of these movies lately have been saying like, you guys should have released the director's cut of these movies because they were too short. Like Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. I'm like, if you released all that other material that you cut out, it probably would have made a lot more sense. But yeah, like Black Panther, I'm like, oh my God, cut all the stuff in America. Like, you could have introduced Riri anywhere else in the world and then cut everything in America, because like none of that stuff, it dragged away from the movie that you were doing, and none of it was really good. So anyway, I mean, Riri could have been visiting Wakanda. I mean, that's an easy solution right there. But anyway, yeah. So, Allie, something that you think is an example of the multiverse done well that you really enjoy.
I think I have to talk about my favorite Spider-Man movie, Into the Spider-Verse. And that's not even one that I think explores the multiverse in the way that we were talking about, that we like exploring the multiverse as like different takes on the same character, since most of the versions of Spider-Man that we see are not the same. They're not Peter Parker versions, or they're not Miles Morales versions. They're all different characters. And I think that's an interesting, like, different way of viewing the multiverse, because in that instance, the character who gets swapped around is Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, etc. And so that's kind of an interesting thing, especially if you take into account like what we, at least what Marvel's doing it now too, sharing superhero identities. We used to not share, DC was pretty good about passing mantles on. There's many different characters who go by the superhero handle Flash, for example, but in Marvel it tended to be there was one Wolverine, and then eventually now we're passing on at least some lineages. But so this was a different kind of take on that, in that we're looking at different multiverses where different people became Spider-Man, and it gives a different message, which is the underlying message of Into the Spider-Verse, which is that anyone could wear the mask, which is just like, that just stabs me right in the heart. That whole idea, like, you could be a hero too. Anyway, that's the movie that makes me cry constantly. But I definitely like viewing, like, one of the things that I think Into the Spider-Verse does particularly well is that it presents really different versions of multiverse, of what the universe could look like. Particularly when you get into options like Spider-Man Noir and Peter Porker. And that's part of when it gets really interesting, is to see those different, like, what the world looks like totally reimagined. And that works particularly well in animation, and I think less well in live action, which is probably why we don't see that same complete reinvention in most live action properties. But it is something that I think is a real strength to exploring the multiverse. It's one of the reasons why I did like the sequence in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, when we crash through all of the various multiverses. I just wish we had spent some time in some of those bizarre ones rather than just crashing through. Which, I mean, again, like I said, not as easy to do in live action. So maybe we'll see them in What If.
Yeah, I will say this though. I mean, at least, I mean, I'm gonna be like the extreme nerd here. Just to again talk about nomenclature and whatnot, and Stargate. I mean, to me, it's not different multiverses. It's all the multiverse. But it's just when you start changing one thing, well, then you change another thing, and you change it. You can get into realities that are really far out there, where so many things have changed that, like, some aspects of how, like, even like existence works are somewhat different, which is where you can try to draw similarities to parallel dimensions, but parallel dimensions are still different because those coexist in the same space that we do. And again, it's a physics thing, and most people don't care about that when they're watching their media, but it is still a parallel reality, because the idea is that it started from the same point originally, but just, so far back that so many things have changed in it to like create, a universe that's very different from ours. And it is interesting that the idea of Spider-Man or some sort of spider character, like ends up existing in each of those, which is, what they were drawing from in that. But yeah, no,
Yes.
it was a very well done movie. I was surprised by how, well written it was, utilizing, the concepts that it was utilizing.
Yeah, that one in particular. But actually, I've got another one, if you don't mind, a second option, which is the Buffy episode, The Wish. For those who don't remember, Cordelia wishes that Buffy had never come to Sunnydale. And the demon Anyanka grants her wish and shows a world in which Buffy never came to Sunnydale. And it's based around the be careful what you wish for. But it shows a very different Sunnydale in which Xander and Willow are vampires and the master has taken over and everyone's dying. And it shows a very different Buffy as well, who wasn't molded by her friends. And so it explores everything about the way those characters come together and influence each other. So it's very much about how found family creates character. So like that's another one that I particularly like, and it's a different version of how you get to the multiverse, in that it's a demon, and they do there's a few other Buffy episodes where they explore alternate realities using magic, basically. But yeah.
Does anyone else have something they want to say about Into the Spider-Verse or even about Buffy?
No, Into the Spider-Verse is fantastic. I mean, it won Best Animated Feature. They actually wrested that Oscar from the from the Disney Mafia. So, and introduced Miles Morales to mainstream America and elsewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, Spider-Verse, extremely well done film, and I really like the Buffy multiverse. I hadn't really thought of that, but that's such a good example of using an additional universe to facilitate a story that's based in character, and it did such a nice job of it.
Yeah. I was thinking about Stargate for a minute there, because I know I was a big Stargate fan. Because I think about all the TV shows that have like used multiverse in just an episode or two, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so
I'm as deep into Buffy as I am to Stargate, actually.
Yeah. All right. So Tom, what's an example of the multiverse that you really like?
I heart Spider-Man No Way Home. That movie should not have worked as well as it did. First off, they broke the villain rule. You have all these villains from 3 different versions of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And, generally speaking, the takeaway from the first iteration of Batman movies is the more villains you have, the less Batman you have. And yet that script kept its eye squarely on Peter Parker, aka Spider Tom Holland, on his journey, and completes his origin. When they killed May Parker, I'm like, what? Because I'm heartless. In the comic books, when he did his deal with Mephisto to keep May alive, but to undo his marriage to Mary Jane, which was, editor-in-chief Joe Quesada had it in for that relationship.
Yeah.
And Joe Straczynski wanted to take his name off the comic, and they're like, please don't. But it's interesting that they twisted it, which is what Marvel often does well with their adaptations. They take the core idea and twist it a different way. But when she, the fact that they gave her Uncle Ben's famous line, with great power comes great responsibility, and that she urges him, you're a hero, be the hero, which is really totally ripped off in Black Panther 2 by astral or ancestral plane Ramunda telling Shuri, show him who you are. But I don't think Tom Holland gets enough credit, because he really grounds his version of Spider-Man. And full disclosure, I never liked Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire has played the same morose loser in everything he's been in. I'm watching Babylon tomorrow. I can tell you if he plays the same morose loser in that. But I just didn't like him as he bored me. Although Spider-Man 2 is still a great movie because Alfred Molina rocks, and he rocked in he rocked in No Way Home. But and then Andrew Garfield, I'm a big fan of his. That dude says more with his eyes when he rescues Zendaya, basically in the same situation where he failed to rescue Gwen Stacy, and they storyboarded that. That was the only thing in Amazing Spider-Man 2 that worked for me, because the mishandling of that franchise, you could do a whole podcast about that.
Yeah.
But when he asks Zendaya, "Are you okay?" and then she shoots back, "Are you okay?" But
my wife was crying in the movie theater.
I do not blame her. I just I thought that script was underrated, and I was really annoyed that between Sony and Marvel, neither one of them submitted it to the WGA for awards consideration, so it was not on the ballots, and you can't. And it's like, how could you drop the ball? Because that was a really good script that accomplished the impossible, and they used Doctor Strange just the right way as a catalyst character, so he touches base in key parts of the movie, but it's still focused on. It's funny, many of the Spider-Man movies have kind of played like Marvel team-ups, because some of my friends have groused, why can't I remember when Spider-Man movies used to be about Spider-Man? It's like, dude, it's a connected universe, and as long as this Sony Marvel alliance lasts, you need to bring in other characters from the established universe to make it work. But wow, I saw it 3 times in the theater. The third time I took my sister and brother-in-law, and she had not seen a Spider-Man movie since Tobey's. And so I had to do a little bit of catch up with her in the car, but she really enjoyed it because it was a solid. It's amazing that a movie like that could stand alone, and yet it was the 8th live action Spider-Man movie.
Yes.
Yeah. It did 2 things that I think a multiverse film has to do to be, or property has to do to be successful, which are really hard to do. And one is that it can't lose focus on who you should be focusing on, which is really easy to do as things are splintering off. But you've got to be laser focused on who the audience should be behind. And the other thing is that you can't have the multiverse mean that your consequences no longer matter. So you couldn't just like kill a character off and then bring it back for another universe and it's all okay. Those consequences still have to be there. And No Way Home did both of those very, very well. The consequences mattered. You knew who to root for, even with all of the different splinters coming around. You knew exactly where to focus on. The fan service was just mixed in just appropriately for the fans, and if you weren't a fan, you didn't feel like you were missing anything. Nothing went over your head. You had just what you needed to do to continue with the story, and then you were done, and then it was gone, and it was really well done. I agree.
And it kind of did the opposite of just kill the characters, since Tom Holland Spider-Man's purpose was, no, we're going to make sure that we're going to fix them so that way they'll live.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was almost like the exact opposite of what we expect in a multiverse film, that, well, they're from another universe, so they don't matter, which is always my problem with when you visit the multiverse. This is what Stargate does, by the way, where they visit the other universe, and Daniel's like, well, I need to get back to my universe to warn them. You guys are gonna all die. Sorry.
Your lives don't matter. It's Spider-Man No Way Home. To me, it is the best movie of Phase 4. It's amazing to me that it's a movie that is so much about Spider-Man, and to me, sort of course correcting Spider-Man in the MCU, because I never liked the sort of Iron Spider that they made him, because I'm a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man guy. Like, to me, Spider-Man's a street level character. And it's like, somehow through this bonkers story that includes the multiverse, every iteration of Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, we're back to friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. You know, he's in a rat infested apartment with a sewing machine, you know, and he's gonna make his own costumes and everything,
and a red and blue lycra suit,
right? And go swinging around neighborhoods fighting criminals, you know, like not you know, Thanos. and characters like that. And it's like, I was like, wow, like not only did they like bring Spider-Man without doing a reboot into like a new area, they made it about fixing things from the previous iterations of Spider-Man to the point that now everybody wants more Andrew Garfield's. Like they're like, Sony can make Andrew Garfield movies and Marvel can make Tom Holland movies, and we can have both movies running concurrently. They're in different universes and people are excited for that.
I'm not sure that Sony can make Andrew Garfield movies, but I'd like to think that they could. I saw both of those, and the
secret is for them to hire people from Marvel to make their movie, their movie for Sony, and not. I'm sorry, Mark Webb, but I don't think you're the guy. But it's just so well written and so well understood the character. I mean, even Doctor Strange, where he's used, I think in many ways he I think that he was better understood than he was understood by Raimi in Multiverse of Madness. And so like I'm just very happy with that movie, and I think it was so well done. And so that's a great call, because the multiverse, they used the multiverse to do all that character stuff. And that was amazing. So and
that's a great use of the multiverse, is to really explore your characters. And they did such a nice job with it. That's what Spider-Verse did too, in a lot of ways, was really explored the characters through the use of the multiverse. That's a really successful way of exploring that idea.
All right, so we've name checked it, but I've got to talk about Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's a movie that I was kind of like, put it on the back burner. I know it has something to do with the multiverse. Michelle Yeoh's in it, and I like her, but it wasn't like a big like I got to go out to the movie theater and see it. And then when I finally saw it, I was like, oh my God, this may be the best movie like of this year. So when Tom was talking about how, this has been a lackluster year, and I was like, oh, there've been some good ones, that was the one I was thinking of, was Everything Everywhere All at Once, was because I'm used to the multiverse being a very hard sci-fi concept when it's utilized. It's often used in big sci-fi, type movies. And I was very fascinated by the idea of telling a story about an immigrant family that's down on their luck, and having marital problems, and making it about the multiverse. And it's so well written, because it's not just, so it's an action movie with the multiverse. It's a movie about mental health. It's a movie about the immigrant experience. It's a movie about the way that we all relate to each other, in our lives, and how like there's all these different versions of ourselves, and, and how we don't always see like the full, like, aspect of somebody that might get expression. And that's where it intersects with the multiverse, is the idea of different expressions of yourself can exist, but they're all still within you. The potential is there, but it's it's out there. And like, it was like a movie that, I mean, it's about something. It's about a lot of things, and they all work. It's not like it feels like there's an A movie and a B movie, and they're not really joined together very well. It's all interwoven seamlessly, and the acting is phenomenal, and the action sequences are phenomenal. And it gets weird. I mean, Allie was talking about how in live action, Allie, have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I haven't yet. It's been on my list,
Allie.
and I have. I know. Trust me, I already got it when even at DragonCon, I got it.
but yeah, I mean, so I won't get into specifics then. But I will say that the kind of off the wall stuff that Into the Spider-Verse does, they do that in live action. Like they really do. Like there are some off the wall realities that we see, like very weird realities that we see in Everything Everywhere All at Once, and they just go for it. It's just like, like this is the reality where everything's a crayon drawing. It's just weird stuff like that. It's just there.
I kept thinking as I'm watching, we all have these different personas about ourselves, right? We have our work self, and our self when we're around our family, and the ones we're around this group of friends or this group of friends or conventions or whatever. And there's all these different aspects of it, but they're all us. But people, if people from work saw me backstage at a show or at a convention, they're going to see something they've not seen before, because those are aspects of myself that I don't show at work. And so it was an exploration of taking all of those different aspects and going in all these different, really completely bonkers directions. And it works so well, because it's something that we can all, I think we can all identify with, because we all have these aspects of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I love about that movie is the notion that this struggling in her job, struggling in her marriage, getting audited by the IRS, and yet this alternate reality version of her husband shows up, who's her husband, but it's not her husband, and tells her, in all the multiverse, you are the most important person. You are the key. And that's kind of a cool concept. And you sometimes see that, but it's not usually the person who's just like average. It's usually the exceptional person who's being told you're the most important. But no, this basically average, struggling immigrant wife is told you're the most important person in all the multiverse. And man, Nathan, if you have it on disc, watch the special features, because the Daniels there's a great scene where they they take on a situation from the movie and are talking about the movie as these objects. They're inanimate objects. I'll give you a clue. I don't want to spoil anything for Allie. It's just, but I watched when the Blu-ray 4K Blu-ray came out, I rewatched the movie and I rewatched all the special features, and it's just delightful, completely original. And I don't think there's not a bad performance in the movie. Jamie Lee Curtis is funny, but also slightly menacing.
Yeah.
But no, it's just a great, and Stephanie Sue plays the daughter, and she was the friend at the bookends of Shang-Chi, who because I was going nuts saying, where have I seen her before? And then I IMDb'd her. It's like, she's the friend. So yeah, can't recommend. That's definitely in my top 5 films of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was justice, that would be best picture for this year.
It's the kind of movie that I absolutely love, because so often I can see a trailer and I'm like, I know the movie, like I know what this movie is. And a movie that can surprise me in a good way and be like, this is not what I was expecting. Because I've had the other experience. I watched 3 Star Wars prequel trailers, and those had me expecting these grand movies. And then I went every time and was disappointed. Each time, the second one was like, oh, look, it looks like they fixed it. The second one will be good. And then, oh, crap.
That's a real trip through the multiverse right there.
Then the third one, okay, they fixed it for the third one. Oh, no, that wasn't it. Okay. But, it's like I've been that disappointed. But this was like, I did not know what to expect with this movie, and I'm so glad I didn't, because it was a delight to experience this movie. It was just, everything was surprising, everything was good, and like I say, it is rare that I don't know that I've ever seen a script that deals in so many levels and they all work. It's not like, oh, you added one element into. Yeah, I've seen ambitious scripts before in movies that I mostly like. But then, I'm always like, oh, that one element, it didn't really work very well. And, this was ambitious and everything worked. And I was just like, oh my God. So yeah, I can't sing the praises of that movie enough.
I think I had a similar experience where I was, halfway through the movie and I have no idea where this is going. And I can't remember the last time I saw a movie that I thought that way.
And I love the fact that they separated the acts into chapters, and it's everything, everywhere, all at once.
It gets really weird.
Bombastic
with all at once.
chord playing.
So anyway, now that we've all shamed Allie by being like, you need to see this.
It's fine. I get it every year. I go to Dragon Con. I go talk on the military sci-fi track. They all get mad at me for not watching Babylon 5. I'm very used to feeling this kind of heat for various reasons.
I'm not mad at you at all, Allie, but I'm actually a little jealous because you're going to get to watch it for the first time, which is such an incredible experience.
I think if she hasn't seen it by now, she's never going to.
I
think
mean,
she
that
has to.
seems likely, but I have also been told, someone told me that they would tell me which ones I could skip. And I
was
said, I
gonna
would be much
say,
more likely to watch.
just watch the arc episodes of seasons 1 and 2, and Straczynski writes all the episodes of 3 and 4. They had to pay the
perfect.
fine to the Writers Guild to do that, but
See, I disagree with that because Peter David wrote some episodes in 1 and 2. You can't skip those. Peter David.
I'm
Peter David is great.
I'm saying that Straczynski wrote all 3 and 4. I wouldn't skip the Peter David episodes; they're great. But 1 and 2, some of those episodes are like, whoa. But the ones that, I mean, once the Shadow War starts, woo, and season 5, ooh, is again one of those where, find out which episodes to watch and which to skip.
I disagree. Even bad episodes of Babylon 5 are better than most episodes of most other shows. I mean, like, it's a great series all the way around. But let's go around one more time. I think we have the time for it. So Stephen, what's another example of the multiverse you would like to mention?
Another one that I would like to mention. I'll go back to the Larry Niven short story, All the Myriad Ways, which is my first entry into, and it is sort of an everyday exploration into a multiverse, but it's a very simple concept of following one person and all the decisions that they make, and then the exploration of the branch off of what happens if the other decision is also made. And so in a short story, it really encapsulates all of those possibilities. Which as a young reader really grabbed my mind. So I haven't read that and reread that. I need to reread that again because it's always worth it. It's in an anthology which also includes Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex, which I highly recommend. highly recommend. But All the Myriad Ways is such a good story.
Can you put in the chat what the name of the anthology is? I want to check that out.
It is All the Myriad Ways is the name of the anthology as well.
Okay. Because I've read Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex, and when I was younger, and that was
everyone reads that when they're younger.
Enlightening.
I'm familiar with the idea of it without having actually read it myself.
It's well worth the reading.
I made a similar diatribe when Supergirl was on, and when she was, dating somebody that didn't have superpowers, and somebody was like, "Oh, like this is just like." This this thing that's talking about Superman, and I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Like, you would murder the person, unfortunately, but anyway,
it doesn't work, but in such a humorous way.
But anyway, has anyone else read this Larry Niven short story? I guess not.
Nope. All right.
Okay.
No.
Add that to your reading list.
All right. Yeah. Our homework is.
I do like Larry Niven, and that was a really good story. It's a good anthology. I think pretty much everything in there is solid.
Yeah. So, Allie, do you have another example?
Yeah. So this one is it's a book. It's called Invictus, by Ryan Grodin, and it is a time travel but multiverse book. And it caught me off guard with it being a multiverse book. I think I just didn't read the description of it very carefully. But it winds up being much more about traveling through the multiverse than it is about time travel. There is time travel involved, but the main character winds up interacting with an alternate universe version of himself that is female. Which is a thing that I absolutely love because it does a lot of fun stuff with gender. And I will say it's not necessarily like the best book in the world. But like what it had to do with the multiverse, I thought was really interesting. And so I was really into what was happening there. And like another book that plays with multiverse stuff also has time travel in it, but it is much more to me about traveling through the multiverse. This is How You Lose the Time War, by Amal El-Mutar and Max Gladstone. It's a novella, so it's pretty quick read, and it is mostly epistolary. So it is these two rival agents who are trying to win the time war by changing different things about different universes, because they're not just traveling through time, they are traveling through different universes as well to kind of sway the world in either more towards a technological or more towards a natural order. And it's primarily a romance because it's these two characters getting to know each other, but they're jumping through all of these different multiverse worlds, and so you'll get hints of the worlds as they are like finding the letters, and then the letters themselves are much more about how the interactions between the characters are changing each other. So like that's another one that is just like phenomenal. That one's amazing. But it is very much a different take on the multiverse, and the science of it is totally unexplained. It is much more about the characters than it is about how do they get there, how are they traveling through this thing, how are they changing time in the multiverses. Like none of that matters. It is entirely about like the weird ways that they leave each other letters by encoding it into like the genetics of a nut that they then put in their mouth and eat, and then they have the letter. It's wild and really cool. Reading that book was a joy.
That does sound very interesting. Yeah, even though I mentioned that I wouldn't talk about time travel with respect to this, there is one, and what you were saying in the beginning at least kind of like tricked a memory for me. And I won't say this is the best example of the multiverse I've ever seen, but it's kind of time travel that allows for multiverse in the sense of there's a Star Trek novel called The Entropy Effect. And in it, this character is like doubling up on his own timeline, and so he's creating like all these changes not only with events on the Enterprise but also with himself. So he's actually like hunting himself as part of the story because one of the versions of him is not good. And so it's like that idea of creating like the multiverse through time travel causing alternate iterations of a single character is also kind of a an interesting sort of idea. But yeah, novels let you do a lot more with the multiverse in the sense of you can get more into concepts that play out rather than you have to show everything in a TV show or a movie.
Entropy Effect by Vonda McIntyre was the first licensed Star Trek book published by Pocket Books under the Timescape line imprint until they got rid of the Timescape imprint. But no, it's solid. It's solid.
Yeah, it's the first Star Trek novel that they did that was not a novel, because they did the motion picture novelization, and then Pocket Books did the Entropy Effect as number 2 in their Star Trek series also. But yeah, so Tom, what is another example that you would bring up?
Since you opened the door to Star Trek, they have dealt with a variety of multiverse issues. I mentioned the Mirror Universe earlier, and they have established it existing through the Next Generation era and beyond, and then back in time with the newer Trek shows. Yesterday's Enterprise season 3 of Next Generation, one of the best, easily one of the top 10 Next Generation episodes.
Oh, the best Next Generation episode. I'm just gonna say it.
I'll give an edge to Best of Both Worlds Part 1.
Okay, I mean that's my number 2. So
because Patrick Stewart did not have a contract for season 4, so that was a real cliffhanger. But basically, the Enterprise C comes out of a space-time anomaly. Everything shifts, and Tasha Yar is alive again. And the only one who realizes that she should not be there is Guinan, and tells her, "You're not supposed to be here. Something's wrong." And they have to send her back on the Enterprise C to go back through the time, the anomaly, to most likely meet their fates. They were going to continue that. The intention was to continue that arc because they teased the existence of somehow that version of Yar survives and gives birth to a half Romulan child named Selah, who becomes a commander in the Romulan Star Empire. but for whatever reason they dropped that arc. I'm surprised nobody finished that up in a novel.
I mean, to me, the crazy thing was that Star Trek Nemesis didn't use her.
Seriously.
Because there was a character there was the female Romulan character that was like, that should have been Sela. Like, and then they could have brought her into a movie. Like, they could have brought Denise Crosby into a movie with the rest of the Next Gen cast. And I was like, I don't know why they didn't, because that was the most logical thing they could have done, and they just didn't do it.
Because Nemesis was a mess of a movie.
Well, it was a mess of a movie, but I'm just saying that would have been great though to at least have Denise Crosby in it. I mean, you know,
that movie was literally a franchise killer. So the less said about it, the more. It's fascinating that when they did reboot the movies 11 through 13, which I like to keep the numbering because I can count, but they widely acknowledged that is, you know, the Kelvin universe, because the Nero's intrusion into the prime timeline splits it. And what's funny is Ron Moore, I wrote my doctoral thesis on Next Generation. Original version was written in 95, and then to publish it, I had to catch up on all the treks in between. So I listened to every commentary on every TNG episode available, special features, etc. Ron Moore's advice basically said that if I had been in their position, I would have rebooted too, because there's just too much continuity, and this allowed them to kind of do the Etch-a-Sketch thing. But you get that great moment when Newkirk meets old Spock in the gulag, and he's like, you know, what? So that was, you know, I'm not a fan of New Khan, because Khan is a swarthy Latino playing an East Asian Indian, not a scrawny white dude.
Well, there are so many problems with that second movie.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they cured death, but then don't do anything with it, like, ever again. It's like, oh, you can just put these superhuman blood into your veins and you can, like, revive someone from death. And I'm like, whoa, why aren't you packaging that stuff? Oh, God.
So many problems with that movie.
For honorable mention, one of the DC Animated Universe movies, Crisis on Two Earths, where they meet their counterparts. In the comic books, it would be from Earth 3, but for simplicity's sake, it's their counterparts from Earth 2, and it's basically the evil Justice League. So you have Ultraman, you have Superwoman, et cetera, and it's really, it kind of goes back to that trope about a lot of parallel universe movies media use, where the evil, why am I blanking on their name of the like evil Justice League?
The Injustice Gang? Is that what it is?
Something like that. But anyway, their goal is to basically wipe out every other Earth but theirs, which obviously, you know, our heroes are not going to stand for. But it's a pretty self-contained, you know, use of multiverse, even though that opens the door to the wider DC, you know, Infinite Earths concept. But entertaining. Boy, I hope that Gunn's idea for Cavill to return doesn't involve him playing Ultraman, because that would be like a real.
Oh no, I think he's smart enough not to do that. I don't think he will do that.
I don't know.
And just like everybody who's saying he should come to Marvel to play Hyperion, and I'm like, he's not going to play a Superman knock. Like, even if he comes to Marvel, don't give him a Superman knockoff as a character for him to play at Marvel. Have him play something different at Marvel. You know, like, I would love to have him in a Marvel movie. Just like, don't give him the Superman knockoff as the character. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, you brought up Star Trek, and you know, next to the mirror universe, which of course they've sort of retconned, you know, because a mirror universe, if you think about it, if it's literally a mirror, doesn't work. They've kind of retconned it as just a parallel reality. But you know, so beyond the mirror universe, which is the first thing I think of when I think of Star Trek and parallel universes, the other one I always think of, and the one that I'm always thinking I'm living through myself, is the one where Worf just keeps walking around and finding himself in other realities. And I'm always like, awesome. Whenever I notice something that isn't where it should be, and I'm like, oh my God, am I just like falling into another reality? You know, because it's like, I'm always convinced that, like it's like I'm living that Worf thing where it's just like, oh, I just stepped into another reality today. Like, things are slightly different.
That was one of the handful of good seventh season episodes, because some of those episodes were like, Beverly and the Ghost, really, dudes?
Oh my God. Have you seen the meme where she and Troy are talking and Troy is saying like she's dating a guy, but he ghosted her and she's like, oh, tell me details. And she's like,
Hilarious.
Oh God. So
hey Nathan, can we, as long as we're on multiverse, can we take a moment and talk about Loki?
I mean the show?
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't quite done them. Well, I mean, they did in that they're doing like the clipped timelines. They're kind of like the multiverse. Yeah.
Supposedly, the multiverse was according to an interview I read, or maybe it was the special feature, the multiverse was created at the end of Loki's season finale.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So, which is why What If was the next show out of the gate.
Right.
Yep.
But I was going to say first, though, does anyone else have anything in regards to Star Trek and the multiverse that they wanted to mention? Okay. Well, let me do my pick first, then we can talk about Loki briefly.
Sure.
Mine is a show called Fringe. And I know,
good. I was just going to talk about
that.
Fringe. It's so good.
So that's a show that existed during so I have this span of time that goes from like college to marriage to like having kids, that it's like I didn't watch like any new shows through this whole time span, and Fringe falls within that time span where I completely missed it. Because of everything before I went into college, I saw everything on TV. I would read every week when the TV thing would come in the newspaper. I would read through the whole thing, look through the whole grid, and figure out what I'm watching and record the things I wanted to watch that I couldn't watch because they were simultaneous, or I was going to be out of the house or whatever. And that was sort of my methodical way of watching things. And then after I went to college, I was way too busy. I continued watching things I was already watching, but the watching new stuff just fell off the bandwagon because I didn't have time to pick up anything new. So yeah, a lot of shows like Fringe just passed me by, but a friend of mine was like, you've got to watch this show. And I was like, okay, I mean, it doesn't Fringe didn't really say anything to me, the name, so I'm like, all right, I'll watch this. And wow, was I blown away by that show. This is a really great show that starts out as oh, this is just another paranormal investigation type show.
Mm-hmm. Next Files ripoff.
Yeah.
Yep.
And wow, did it go heavy into the multiverse? And they don't go bonkers a lot of these things we've talked about. They don't go into all the different possibilities. It's mainly just two different universes that they're talking about. But the idea of these two iterations and how they affect each other, and the fact that they have different music. I love the fact that they do the theme differently if it's an episode about universe A or if it's about universe B. And then later on the universes merge and then the theme is different for that too. And they even do one where it's a whole flashback episode set in the 80s, and they do an 80s version of the theme. And I just love all the different
an 80s version of Fringe technology.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And that show, it handled the multiverse concept really well because it did keep it very limited, but again made it about the characters and made it about how did this one thing, which again, for people who haven't seen Fringe, I don't want to get too deep into the why. But there's this one event mainly that separates the universes and how that affects the main characters differently and how their universes end up. And, because of this fringe science that they deal with, they have the ability now to cross over. And so, that all that interplay between the two universes, and then getting into, well, let's put in all this sort of fringe science stuff on top of the fact that it's a multiverse, sort of Cold War thing that we're doing. And it's just it's really good. It is really good. I was surprised by how good it was. So that would be my other pick for this.
The first season finale I've used in my screenwriting classes as a case study, because it's called There's Two of Everything. And it's where basically the end of the episode, we're in New York and Olivia crosses over and then looks out the window and she's in the Twin Towers, and this is post 9/11, and there's a dirigible docking somewhere at a skyscraper. And the fact that they were able to coax Leonard Nimoy out of retirement to play the other, the founder of, is it General Dynamics?
Something that it's not general.
Massive Dynamics.
Yeah, that's it.
Massive
and
Dynamics.
His character is William Bell.
Bell.
Yeah, so my friend does not tell me Leonard Nimoy is in this show. I'm like, that was the thing. You just needed to tell me Leonard Nimoy was in this and I would have watched it instantly. And she like waits for me to like watch it. And I'm like texting her like, how did you not tell me Leonard Nimoy was in this?
I watched the pilot with before the show premiered. Sometimes my writer friends will get when I lived in LA would get pilots ahead of time. And so I watched it with some friends, and we weren't impressed by the pilot because it was just an X-Files ripoff. Yeah. And then some friends of mine ended up working on season 2, and they told me these are the arc episodes of season 1. Watch these to prepare for season 2. But the thing that was really Anna Torv in the pilot was kind of stiff, and I'm like, oh, J.J. Abrams is usually good with casting women, and he missed on this one. And then by the end of the series, it's like, oh, I was so wrong. After Leonard Nimoy had passed, there's an episode where Anna Torv channels Bell, Nimoy's character, and does a pitch perfect imitation, and it's like, wow. Plus, what Nathan hasn't mentioned is, even though they kept it fairly simple, at the end of, I think, one of the seasons, a character is unwritten from existence. And then most people don't remember him. And yet
although I will say the payoff to that like made me want to throw a table. Like they had the trope line, a thing you humans call love, and I was just like,
oh yeah, well, come on.
That's why you can remember. You were going so well until that point. End of season 4, you dropped the ball. Why?
And one of the cool things about they weren't sure if they were going to get a 5th season pickup, so they wrote an escape hatch in case they did, and executed that plan for season 5. But the really cool thing about season 5 is our metaphorical family becomes an actual family, and I love. That's one of the last big network sci-fi shows I love.
I have to tell you, like, a multiversal experience that I had myself is I rewatched Fringe recently, and I had totally forgotten that it was 5 seasons. So I was convinced that I was gonna stop at the end of season 4, and then I was like, "What? There's a 5th season? I don't remember that. Like, I didn't remember any of the episodes. I watched it all." So I had my own multiverse experience with it.
My friend says that season 5 is basically a different show, and it kind of is, even though a lot of the same characters are in it. I mean, it's so different in the way that everything, like the whole setup and how everything, is. It's a very different show. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of season 5, but it's still nice that they got to it was a last minute pickup kind of thing of, it was kind of. And so they had to just do something with, okay, we got it was a half season, right? It was like 13, 14 episodes.
It was 13 episodes.
Yeah.
I love the actor they cast as the offspring of 2 major characters. And she hasn't worked enough in my mind, but I
know her as Elsa from Once Upon a Time. So
I was going to say she was brilliant on Once Upon a Time. That was... Once Upon a Time had the habit of they do 2 arcs, and one I would love and the other I'd be like, whatever. But I thought they nailed the Frozen arc.
I do too. My friend actually who introduced me to Fringe hates. He said like the Frozen arc is when like Once Upon a Time like went bad, because she's like, oh, it became like so kid friendly once it became Frozen, and before it was like taking these old fairy tales and making them very adult and blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, no, I disagree. I thought, as someone with 2 girls in my my it was steeped in Frozen for like a year or 2, like I was like, wow, this is like a really good. And I get that they didn't do do what they did before, which was they took a lot of these old Disney stories and like twisted them. It was very much a straight sequel to Frozen. But I was like, this feels like they understood the characters in Frozen, and this is the continuation of, to me, it's a better Frozen 2 than the Frozen 2 that we got in movie theaters. So.
Plus, casting Elizabeth Mitchell to play the real Snow Queen, that was brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that arc also in Once Upon a Time, but yeah. Which also kind of did a multiverse, but we're not going to talk about that. But
I was about to say
season 7.
What? No.
All right, so Steven, you wanted to talk about Loki. So what do you want to mention about Loki?
Well, I think it was sort of the beginnings of a multiverse within the MCU, and with the TVA was actually trying to establish some parameters around these variations.
Sacred timeline.
Yeah, really around these variations, and also that that whole organization within Marvel Comics was done as a reaction to a parody of Mark Gruenwald, who hated all of these variations that were done in comics and wanted to end them. So it was basically sort of making fun of him, and using that within the impetus of a multiverse just struck me as ironic as heck. And it was I appreciated how well done it was.
Yeah, I like Loki in the fact that it took Endgame, which had the worst time travel that I've ever seen, like in any big budget movie. I've seen some indie films kind of things that did time travel worse, but like it was really bad how they did time travel in Endgame, and like the whole like you could change whatever you want, it doesn't change anything, and it was like that makes no sense at all, and being like, all right, we'll explain this. So they do a whole series just to explain why Endgame works. And I was like, I appreciate that. I appreciate the work that you put in just to try to explain that. So.
I appreciate that Loki broke the timeline and gave us the multiverse in the MCU because I love the multiverse. I love getting to explore it. And I think it's the greatest gift that Loki could have ever given the Marvel universe.
Yeah, I'm not going to retread the ground that I tread on the actual Loki podcast, which you can go back and listen to. But I will say this. Please, for season 2, give us fun hijinks with Loki. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah,
you can use time travel in the multiverse to do that. Like the fact that Loki was such a serious show, and using Loki and time travel, I was not expecting that, and I just want some fun. Give me some fun, please.
I did love the introduction of He Who Remains, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is very divisive, though, because my friend, again, the friend who introduced me to Fringe, she hates it. She's like, it's only for people who know the comics, because it makes no sense if you don't know the comics. And I'm like, yeah, but you have to give it time because this is the idea. He's a non-linear character. And so you're experiencing out of order. And I'm like, that's actually the most Kang thing that they could have done is have us experience him out of order. But she's just like, it made no sense. It wasn't any, just boring talking and blah, blah, blah. And she just gets mad about it anytime it's brought up. And I'm like, it worked for me. But then again, I know the comics. So I was just like, yeah, I see what you're doing there. There was one of two possibilities that I expected. And it was, so.
But considering he's the big bad of Phase 5 and the clips I've seen of him from Quantum Mania, Jonathan Majors is blowing up, man. I mean, he's the lead of Devotion, he's the villain in Quantum Mania, and he's the antagonist in Creed 3. And that's just in the next 3 months. 4 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and the dude's good. If you haven't seen Lovecraft Country on HBO, which is crazy good, and what's really cool is he's the second lead of that because Journey Smollett's she's the lead, and that was cool to not only to see an Afrocentric sci-fi fantasy horror show, but to have a Black female as the lead, and the Black man is her sidekick for all intents and purposes. So yeah, and they do some crazy genre stuff throughout the whole run of the series.
Yeah, excellent series.
All right. Well, I think we've been going for a good while here. I will leave some space here for you if you just want to shout out anything else like that you think is a good, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to get into it. But if there's something else where you're like, hey, if you like the multiverse, you should check this out, so let's do that. So, Steven, do you have anything else that you would just like to throw out as a recommendation?
As a recommendation,
I mean, if you want to say stay away from this also, I mean, I guess you can do that too. Like,
I kind of forget. I'd like to see Marvel do something more interesting with Marvel zombies than just have them.
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna have them, have a purpose for them. I wasn't. I mean, really
that's the whole zombie culture we live in general. Like, do something they never do.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that's my plea.
Well,
that is my least favorite thing about What If.
Exactly.
It's spinning off into its own series.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not excited yet.
Neither am I. That was definitely my least favorite of the season 1 What If episodes.
Yeah. I mean, I heard about the comic, I read the synopsis of the comic, and I am just like, no interest. I don't know why that interests people, but if you like it, then great. But it's not.
It seems like a good one-shot idea. But if you
they're like on like the 5th or 6th
it,
iteration now, like in the comics.
if you don't have somewhere to go with it beyond just, hey, there are Marvel characters as zombies, then really, but that seems to be where they're at.
I can
the What If episode centered Bucky, so I was into that.
But yeah, like every series now has to do a zombie episode. Like zombie stuff is just like it's everywhere, and I don't really care for it.
Right.
The season 2 premiere was screened at Comic-Con in San Diego, and it's What If Captain Carter fought the Hydra Stomper. It's basically their take on Winter Soldier. It's really good. It's
okay.
I'm very excited.
Yeah.
All right, Allie, do you have any recommendations, shout outs, or again, if you want to throw out something like this was just trash, don't don't read or watch this.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head except thinking of Stargate. Don't dismiss your alternate universe that you're visiting. It's just it's among other things really rude. You're a guest there. And saying that they don't need to survive, that it's not important that their base and world is being bombed by aliens. I'm just saying, not a good look. It's one of the things that frustrate me whenever they go and then it's like, well, there's the Prime universe and that's the only one that we care about. And it's fine. Everyone else who's in that other universe, the whole universe can just die. No one doesn't matter. But yeah, that's more of, I feel like, a tip for writers and creators. Don't dismiss the alternate universe.
Yeah, there's actually a Star Trek Voyager episode like that where it's not a multiverse, but like they get split, like the ship gets split and it's like 2 copies, and one like a character and a baby die on one ship and the whole ship blows up on another, but they save the character and the baby, and it's like, oh, all's well because like we ended up with a complete crew, and it's just like it shouldn't be that simple.
Isn't that the episode where the Prime Harry Kim dies and is replaced by, and they never acknowledge that again? It's
right?
Like,
yeah.
What?
Well, we got a Harry Kim. We're good.
Right? Yeah, we got a Harry Kim and Vincent Wildman's baby that also died in the other, and they pulled the baby, and it's like that's fine because we replaced them.
Right.
That was weird.
That's one of the things that like Farscape did very right when they doubled Crichton. Both of them were quote unquote the real one. And so there were real consequences when you lost one. And like, that's the stakes that we want. We want there to be real consequences. We want to really care.
I mean, there's a whole discussion around the morality of that and about the idea of if there are infinite iterations, like at what point does life matter and your consciousness and everything else. That it's like, I mean, I think you could get into interesting discussions about that. But yeah, no, On a surface level, I agree with you entirely that it's like, especially when we're talking about characters that are mostly the same as yourself, but it's like you treat it as like, like their life doesn't matter.
It's just very weird.
It's from a story standpoint, it doesn't serve the audience well. The consequences need to matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tom, any shout outs you want to do?
I'm going to go back to the Arrowverse, and my beef with Crisis was they had.
I knew I was going to pay for this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to leave that one open.
It's all
the
good.
first one we talked about. But yes, Tom.
They had an entire year to plan for it, so the writing shouldn't have seemed rushed.
Mm-hmm.
And the ending was just the weirdest insult at the end of Crisis was they put Titans and Doom Patrol on different Earths, and Doom Patrol is a spinoff of Titans.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
WTF? Do you watch your own shows, people? And they're all Berlanti
Yeah, but
shows.
the Doom Patrol as shown on Titans was different. Like the chief was different, and even some of the actors playing some of the other ones were different.
They fired
So
the boring guy and hired Timothy Dalton.
right, but what I'm saying is that it's just that there is a version of Doom Patrol on the Titans Earth, but it is a different. But it's different. Just like in a lot of the DC stuff, like there are versions of these characters on other Earths. But the one in the Doom Patrol show never had Beast Boy as a member.
Yeah.
So like, they're different, so.
The misdirect about a Flash dying and then Earth 90s Flash substitutes I thought that was a cheap.
That is the biggest one to me, because they have used that newspaper article since episode 1 of The Flash, and that should have meant something. And that was a case of what Allie's talking about, where it's like, oh, it's actually the Flash from the 90s TV show, The Flash, that dies, even though that makes no sense for the article.
Right.
Like, if you freeze framed and read the article, it was definitely Iris talking about the Barry Allen Flash. And it's like, not only did the events not happen like the article like said, but also it's like, oh, well, it's some other Flash that died, and so it's okay. And it's just like, that got me mad. Yes.
And if they had cojones and foresight, they could have, because Supergirl just went one season more. In the comics, Supergirl's death in issue 7, one of my English profs at the Naval Academy passed from cancer right around the time that Supergirl died in the comic books, and she was a big Supergirl fan. So for me, Kara Zor-El's death reminded me of Nancy Wicker's death. But if they had some foresight to really do Crisis right, you need a significant character death that's meaningful. And by not, they killed Ollie. They somehow made that seem anticlimactic.
It was super anticlimactic.
Yeah, although to be fair to them, they didn't know Melissa Benoist was going to get pregnant and want to stop doing the show.
Well,
so
they knew she was shagging her co-star who she ended up marrying. So.
Well, I know that, but they thought she was going to have more years left in her. So they were like, oh, so Oliver makes this deal. It's like, I know Supergirl's going to die, but I'll kill me instead. And somehow that's a substitution that can happen. And so that was how they tried to...
Yeah, and to be fair, and I'm no Arrowverse expert, and I haven't seen everything in the Arrowverse, but I have yet to see anything that didn't feel rushed.
Yeah.
Superman and Lois is going into third season this February 23.
It's actually well written.
Is actually well written, and they actually have a larger budget than a typical Arrowverse show, because we find out at the end of season 2 it's technically not in the Arrowverse.
It's not Arrowverse, even though it's on the CW. So
that's why it's better written and has a bigger budget.
It's on one of the finite Earths, and what's fascinating about how they set up the show is John Henry Irons basically is he claims to be Captain Luthor, or is addressed by his ship's AI. He's from a doomed universe where an evil Superman murdered his wife, who was Lois Lane. And then by the end of season 1, his daughter, Natalie, instead of Natasha, but it's still Nat for short, she finds her way to this Earth, and they begin season 2 with this really weird setup that John Henry and Natalie are living on the Kent farm, and Lois is a constant reminder of her dead mom. And they do an episode where they have to deal with that. But and then they introduce, after a really cool fake out, we think it's going to be Doomsday, and it's nah, dog, it's Bizarro. So we get to see their version of Bizarro World.
Okay.
It's not played for laughs.
Oh, good.
And
cool.
the villain is the big bad for the season is a take on the Parasite. But they did some fun stuff. And in the finale, we find out once and for all from General Lane talking to his grandsons, I've been on a lot of other Earths with lots of heroes, but on this one, your dad's it. And it's like, what? So the spinoff of Supergirl is not a spinoff of Supergirl.
Right. He just looks like the Superman from that universe, but it's a different. Yeah, no, I hated
the same
that
actor
decision.
in both, but yeah.
Yeah, I hated that decision because
I wish they had told us earlier.
Right. Well, they only made the decision in season 2. In season 1, they were still conceptualizing it as part of the Arrowverse, and it's only in season 2 that they made the decision. Because in season 1, they wanted to do a crossover with Batwoman, but because that didn't happen because of COVID, then they started thinking, they said between the seasons, they were like, wait, since we never actually drew any direct connections to the Arrowverse, do we have to be in the Arrowverse? And so then they decided with season 2 that it wasn't. So yeah.
And a lot of people were upset that they got Jenna Dewan to reprise her role as Lucy Lane, and then it's not the same Lucy Lane from Supergirl because we're on a different freaking Earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I'm a big fan of Tyler Hoechlin as Superman and Bitsy Kellett as Lois Lane. So it's a shame that they had to recast Jonathan because of the original actor having some mental health issues. But it's good that he was honest with them. And this business is a grind for so many people. And the fact that how any child actor makes it out, in halfway decent shape. And I've taught a couple of child actors, some of whom have gone on and they're on Fire Country and were in Black Lightning previously, and some of them are doing something different and having good lives in their new career path.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping it'll survive whatever purge is coming at the end of the year from CW, because they've said, yeah, we might pick up a couple of shows from the current schedule. It's like,
yeah, well, I mean, it's got 3 things. It's got to pass 3 tests. It's got to pass the CW test and get renewed by the CW. It's got to pass the Warner Brothers Discovery test, and they might just decide it's too much money, we're going to cancel it. And it's got to pass the James Gunn test of, now that he's in charge and he wants to do an integrated universe, will he just say, like, the show is ending? So there's 3 different tests that they've got to pass. And I'm still thinking, though, he won't interfere with anything for the next TV season, because his stuff still won't be out by then, I would think.
Right.
So I would hope that he wouldn't interfere with that.
Movies he greenlights next year, the earliest they'll appear is sometime in 2024. So it'd be foolish to cripple a TV show on HBO Max or the CW because of that. Otherwise, you're going to have like no live action DC stuff at all.
But we know, because the president of CW, the old president of CW, said that he wanted to renew Batwoman and Legends, and it was actually the studio that canceled those, they said, we don't want to spend the money on these shows. And so we know that Warner Brothers Discovery is killing its own stuff. So that's
Batgirl. Come on. Which probably, Brendan Fraser is probably going to get nominated for The Whale. And will that make a difference to them? No, they're making all kinds of weird, arbitrary decisions.
Yeah.
Oh, Westworld's canceled on HBO. Let's pull it off HBO Max and put it somewhere else.
No. So for my shout outs, I do want to put a word in there for Sliders. I know that Tom mentioned it. Sliders is the quintessential multiverse show. I don't think that any show did the multiverse before Sliders. It has John Rhys Davies in the 3 seasons. Those are the ones to watch. You don't have to watch seasons 4 and 5 because they don't have John Rhys Davies. But he is amazing. He is amazing at everything that he does, and so you should watch him.
He's back in Indiana Jones 5 too, right?
Yes. In fact, he narrates the beginning of it. Like, he's the one talking in the beginning, and I was like, John Rhys Davies! I was so excited.
Dial of Destiny.
Yeah, what? Dial D for Destiny is what I'm calling it.
Fear of Destiny, yes. Dial of Destiny, not dog.
Just because it has a bad title doesn't mean it's going to be a bad movie. I'm hoping it's the opposite of a good title and a bad movie. It's just
the fact that we've got a new director, I'm hoping against hope.
But yeah, no, I did want to mention Sliders, and I did want to mention Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. Because very rarely in fantasy do you see the multiverse used. It's generally a sci-fi concept.
Are we going to get to Wheel of Time or alternate universes in the show eventually?
I'm sorry, what?
Are we going to get to alternate universes in the Wheel of Time show?
Maybe. I don't know what the show is doing. I haven't even watched the season they put out yet.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet?
No. I'm trying to catch my wife up on the books beforehand.
Okay.
So, and then we're gonna watch it together. But yeah, like it's a fantasy series that uses alternate universes, which was really fascinating to me when I first read it when I was a teenager. Because I'd never seen like in fantasy before. I was like, whoa, they're doing parallel universes in fantasy, and that's really neat. And there's sort of this concept though of it is a prime universe idea, and like the further you go from the prime universe, the more distorted the realities get in either time or space. So like because they're less real basically, and so it's like you can visit these other realities, but like you might take a step and go miles. Or it might be you're in that reality for what feels to you to be like seconds, but you return and it's hours, or vice versa. It might feel like hours and you return and it's seconds, because like as you get further away, they become more distorted. And I was like, that's really cool though, to deal with that in a fantasy setting, and like just the idea of alternate realities. And especially when they have this idea of there being like time is part of this tapestry. The Wheel of Time weaves this tapestry, but to have the idea also that fate isn't necessarily fixed, because there are these other versions also. And so like I really liked that idea, and I like the fact that they did that in that. So there are many reasons to read the Wheel of Time, and that is just one of those. But yeah.
Cool.
But all right, thank you guys for talking about the multiverse for so long. Like I said, I want to do one of these on time travel also, which I think we're going to find a lot more examples of things to talk about. But just say your goodbyes and let people know where they can find you. So Tom, why don't you start us off?
You can find me on Twitter at BlurredPhD, also on Instagram and Facebook the same way. And I host the Screen Tom podcast, Screen Tom THOM, on iTunes and Anchor.
All right, Steven.
No, thanks for having me. And I have to apologize because there's another universe where I wasn't able to make it. So you can find me on Instagram at Mallets Before Thought. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page of Stephen Pickering Performances. If you're in the Elmhurst, Illinois area in end of February, I will be doing a Scooby-Doo parody called That's the Way the Cookie Murders, where I'll play Don Knotts on stage, which will be very exciting. And in an upcoming film, The Gray Girl, whenever it's finished, and I will hopefully let people know where they will catch that when it's done.
It's Ron Rotz.
They might use that line in the show. I can't give away anything.
I told you before, the Scooby-Doo series where they had guest stars every episode is my favorite Scooby-Doo, where it was like Phyllis Dillard and like Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin was always my favorite.
Yeah,
I love that.
Harlem Globetrotters.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Although the Addams Family available episode is the one episode for some reason there's a weird rights thing.
Oh,
yeah.
The almost complete new Scooby-Doo movies on iTunes.
But yeah, before Marvel had their cinematic universe, there was the Scooby-Doo
Scoobyverse.
Scooby-Doo.
There we go.
What row?
Where the weirdest things all happen to exist in the same universe with each other.
With celebrities.
But yeah, Ellie, say goodbye. Let people know where they can find you.
Thanks for having me on to talk about the multiverse. This was fun. If you want to find me places, I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Self-Winding. And if you're interested in getting those writing prompts or reading what I'm writing, Patreon.com/Allie Martin, ALLIMARTIN. Also my website, alliemartin.com. Writing and editing. Those are the things that I do.
All right. Well, Tom, Stephen, and Allie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us, Nathan.
And that's it for our first class on Multiversity. So what did you think of the episode? Do you like it when we do topics like this? Why do you think the multiverse has just taken off lately? You can let us know in a bunch of different ways. One way is to email us at everything@42cast.com. Another way is to go to our website, which is 42cast.com. You can also go to our Facebook, which is facebook.com/42cast. You can also go on Instagram or Twitter at 42cast. You can find us there, talk to us there. You can also give us reviews on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts. With Apple, the more reviews that we get, the more we will show up in searches. So we would definitely appreciate if you have an Apple account, if you take the time to give us a review. I also want to let you know about the ESO Network Patreon. That's a way that you can help all the shows on the network. There's various tiers that you can review by going to patreon.com/ESO Network. You can look at the various perks. And if you have the money to contribute, we would definitely appreciate it. You can find me on 2 other podcasts. One is Time Streams, where my friend Juliet and I are going through all of Doctor Who from the beginning. The other is Legendary Forces, where Juliet and I again, but also joined by Joe, Ashley, and Corey, are going through all of Star Wars fictional media from the beginning. The 2 podcasts are different. Time Streams is more of just a review of a story. We'll talk about all the important things that happen in the story, so it's not even necessary for the people listening to it to have watched the episode we're talking about, because we tell you all of the important things in the episode. You definitely get more out of it if you do follow along with us, but you don't have to. With Legendary Forces, yeah, we talk about the quality of the media, but we don't really give you a play-by-play, so if you haven't read or watched the story we're talking about, you won't necessarily understand what we're talking about. But also we talk about the evolving notion of what Star Wars is, how the different media sort of change perceptions of Star Wars, and how every time a movie comes out, things change in the storytelling to take in the new information that comes in from the movie. And so we have discussions about canon, continuity, that kind of stuff. So if that sounds interesting to you, the Doctor Who one is Time Streams, and the Star Wars one is Legendary Forces. Once again, I have no more to report on stuff that I'm watching or on cons and such. I'm recording several of these outros back to back, so there's nothing new there, but keep watching this space. All right, well, that's it for this week. Join us back next week when I talk to the members of the Odyssey Now project, a university-led initiative that is going back to not only research the very first video game console, but also sort of push the boundaries of what it was capable of and create new content for it. So it's a very interesting discussion. I had a lot of fun talking with those guys. So definitely look out for next episode and come back again when we do our normal sort of TV, movie reviews and all that kind of stuff. So until then, this is Nathan signing off. You have been listening to the 42 Cast, copyright 2021. Got a question for the ultimate answer? Contact us at everything@42cast.com. Theme music is Sharper Swords by Brandon Ellis. Check out more of his work at www.cityfires.com. The 42 Cast is a proud member of the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.